Well, my mama didn't raise any dummies. I didn't jump into that pen to save the dog. But the dog was a very obedient dog. We started coaxing him to the edge of the fence, trying to get him out of there and away from this bull. The bull had to be 800 or 900 pounds, I suppose. Those things are huge. And the dog did. He slowly inched, but he kept looking at the bull and kept barking. I say barking, although he was so small he didn't have much of a bark. It was more of a yipper sound. And finally got close enough to the edge of the fence that I could reach in and snatch him up and get him out of there. And as we walked away from that pen, the dog looked over my shoulder and at that bull as if, boy, you're lucky I have to leave. The arrogance of that little dog. We came to think of him as the world's smallest Doberman, because I really think he thought he was a Doberman or a much bigger dog than he really was. Through his life, he had many incidents of running into other dogs, primarily. He was very, what would you say, protective of wherever we lived. And the dog, in his lifetime, we lived in several different locations. And right away, he'd know which was our property, and he'd watch the property. A very good watchdog for a little guy. Any other dogs, stray dogs that wandered on the property, he'd roust them out of there real quick. For a time, we lived in near New Ulm, Minnesota, and I had rented a place that was on the Cottonwood River up on a bluff. So you had to go down to the river. I never measured or counted the steps, but it was quite an incline. And the rule with my boys, I had 2 sons by that time, that was that they weren't supposed to go to the river without me because it was too dangerous, especially in the spring of the year when the water was running fast. There was still ice on their river. One day, Steve came running in the house, yelling, "Dad, come quick, Scruffy's in trouble." I don't know. This was in the spring of the year. I went outside, and I could hear the dog barking. And Steve pointed down the hill towards the river. I think what had happened was Scruffy had tried to go on some ice on the river, and the ice was breaking loose from the shoreline and going and floating down the river. A tree had fallen into the river, landing on its branches, and this ice floe with the little dog had tangled in the branches of that tree. I could see that it wasn't going to last long. The ice was wearing out and going to turn loose, and the dog would be gone forever because that water was still freezing cold. I and Steve went tearing down the hill, and on the way down thinking, I don't know how I'm going to get him out of there. I can't go in that water, I'd get hypothermia. So I tried climbing out on the log from the shore, going out towards the branches that were laying in the water. And I crawled on my belly on this log till I got above the ice floe with the dog on it. I knew I would have one chance of grabbing him, and the dog would have to cooperate, and I'd have to time everything. So I thought through it in my head. I'm going to grab a branch with one hand, lean way over with the other hand, and grab him behind the neck by the collar area. And I knew I couldn't pull him up and wouldn't be able to carry him off that log because I would have to go backwards. I thought my only chance is to throw him towards shore behind me. So I practiced that in my mind, reached over, told Scruffy to stand still. I grabbed him behind the collar, swung my arm forward, and then back as hard as I could, throwing him backwards to an area I couldn't see. Yelled at Steve to catch him if he could, which he didn't. The dog hit the ground rolling. I watched over my shoulder, but he was safe. But I'm still out on the log, of course. But I had to inch off backwards off that log, and we all came out of it okay. The Adventures of Scruffy. Could write a book about all of his fights and problems he caused, but he was a lovable little dog. He, all of the times he once got into a fight with a flock of geese. Now, geese, you wouldn't think would cause much of a problem to a dog, except that the fully grown goose is probably twice as big and heavy as the little dog, and there was a whole flock of them. One time he chased a family of raccoons into a culvert under a road and got stuck in this culvert, and the raccoons were face to face with him. As far as I could tell, you couldn't see into the culvert, you just knew he was in there. And we coaxed him, and he finally had to back all the way out to safety. All of the problems that we had with the dog, but everybody loved him. Once he gave me one of the biggest embarrassments of my life. At that time, the boys went to school by school bus. And I lived I'd rented a farm site. And I had a long lane on it. So the boys would walk down the lane and wait for the school bus. But there were trees around the place that I couldn't see them walking down. I had to assume they got it down there. Well, Scruffy always followed the boys down there, Steve and his brother. And then I knew they had gotten on the bus because Scruffy would come back to the house. Well, this particular day I was doing some yard work, and at that time I didn't go to work until 1 o'clock in the afternoon. So I had the morning to myself to do all my yard work. And Scruffy was around the yard, and I saw him and thought everything was okay. Eventually it got to be, 11 o'clock or something like that. And I headed back to the house to start cleaning up, have some lunch, and go to work. When I got to the house, the phone was ringing. Now you have to understand, these are the days before everybody carried cell phones. I answered the phone, and it was a school that the boys went to, the elementary school. They saying, "Oh, Mr. Meyer, finally got a hold of you." I said, "What's the problem?" He said, the secretary's voice said, "Well, can you come and pick your boys up from school?" "Oh, yeah, I guess I can." "Well, what's the problem?" "Well, they smell bad and they're causing a disturbance." Now, this is the embarrassing part. When somebody calls and says you have to pick up your kids because they smell bad. I says, "What do they smell like?" "Well, they're telling everybody that their pet dog flushed out a skunk before they got on the bus, and the skunk sprayed them." "Oh, no, okay. Yeah, I'll come and pick the boys up." So I had to pick them up, and I picked up some tomato juice. I'd heard once where tomato juice bath will clean up skunk odor. It does a little bit, I guess I found out, but nothing like time that'll wear that smell off. So they missed a day of school on account of Scruffy trying to tangle with a skunk.